for coming to day 2 of Vannavil. We at Vannam are proud to introduce today's speaker, Ruth Vanitha, an Indian academic who specializes in Indian and British literary history with a focus on gender and sexuality studies. She is a professor at the University of Montana. She was the founding co-editor of the first feminist magazine in India, Manushi. She has authored many literary works, fiction and non-fiction alike, such as Same-Sex Love in India, Memory of Light and the Broken Rainbow. She will speak about same sex marriages and the joint suicides of young, low income, non English speaking couples, predominantly women, from 1980 to the present. She intends to explore some of the religious, literary, legal background for same sex unions in Indian history. Please give it a round of applause. Yeah, you can start.
Okay. All right. So, hello everyone. I'm going to talk about the present debate on marriage equality, which is before the Supreme Court. And then I'm going to give some background on the history of same-sex unions in Indian literature and history. Okay, so here just to start with a couple of the petitioners who had filed a suit in the High Court, which has now gone to the Supreme Court, asking for the right to marry under the Special Marriage Act. These are another two petitioners. So now I want to, if you look at these petitioners, you come up, some people criticize the whole idea by saying, oh, it's an upper caste kind of idea. It doesn't affect most people. And that is what I want to contest that idea. I want to point out that that is wrong. Why is it wrong? Because first, marriage equality is an Indian idea. It's not an idea imported from the West, and it's not an upper class phenomenon alone. How do we know this? Because since 1980, there have been these young, low income, non English speaking women all over the country, female couples. That since 1980, they had no contact with any movement, most of these couples. They didn't know, there was basically no gay movement in India at the time, no LGBT movement. They didn't know any word like gay or lesbian or anything. But on their own, they either got married by religious rites or they committed joint suicide. Sometimes they did both. They first got married and then committed joint suicide as a form of union. And who were these women? These women were, as I said, non-English speaking. It's very important. They include Dalits, tribals, Hindus, Muslims, Christians, fisherwomen, factory workers, agricultural laborers, and students, many others. And so that's the first point. It's not an upper class phenomenon because this is the background. These are the true pioneers of marriage equality. I don't use the term same-sex marriage because same-sex marriage is not, I mean, I do use it, but same-sex marriage is not different from cross-sex marriage. It's the same right to marriage. It's when that same-sex couples want. They don't want any special rights or anything different. Secondly, the other evidence is that pre-20th century Indian literature contains references to same-sex marriages and unions. And both these things I have written about in my work extensively. And so I'm going to talk just briefly. I can only skim the subject today. All right, let's start with 1987. So in 1987, you may have this case made headlines. It was the first reported case of a same-sex wedding. You must have heard of it, but this doesn't mean it was the first wedding that took place. It was the first that reporters came to know. How did they come to know? Because these two were policewomen. And when they got married in a temple, they were suspended from their jobs. One of them was a divorcee, the other was a widow with children. And then what happened was they were thrown out. They went off to Urmila's village and were there. And in the village, the family, to console them, Urmila's family held a wedding reception for them in the village. And then journalists went to interview the people, and Urmila's neighbor, Sushila Bhavasar, she was a village school teacher. She told a journalist, after all, what is marriage? It is a wedding of two souls. Where in the scriptures is it said that it has to be between a man and a woman? This is, I think, a very significant statement because for many reasons, which I'll talk about later. But she says, where is it said that it has to be between a man and a woman? One of the arguments that I made in my book about marriage and that lawyers are now making in the court is that the Hindu Marriage Act and the Special Marriage Act say this is to regulate marriage between two Hindus or two people, two persons. It doesn't state that they have to be a man and woman. It simply says bride and groom. But of course, brides have not always been female in India, in Indian history. And that is what I'll talk about a little later. All right, now I want to give you some more examples of who these female couples were from 1980 onwards. 1980 was a joint suicide attempt in Kerala. There were several joint suicide attempts in the 80s, and then 1987 was this first wedding. I want to just show you the faces. Many cases we don't have pictures, but I want to show you a few that we do have. This is one that I find very moving. You can look at the two women and see not only are they non-English speaking, they are very poor. One of them works as a domestic worker. The other works as in the fields as a field laborer. They are Kandha tribals. One is 30, the other at the time of the marriage. One is 30 and one was 22. They eloped from the village in 2012, and then there was a lot of conflict in the village. The family, one of them had been married and escaped after abuse, and the other one had been engaged and broke the engagement. And then the family members intervened. The brother of one supported them, and they persuaded the whole community, and the tribal priest married them. They came back to the village, and the village elder says they love each other very much, so we decided to forgive them. And there are other wonderful examples of tribal women getting married. Another northeastern tribal couple, Tingring and Roinathi Basumatari, who had to run away from their village. They were beaten in their village. They ran from village to village, and finally they found a place where they settled down. So all right, another more recent example from 2018. Two women, Bhavna Thakur and Asha Thakur. So this marriage was what we would call an intercaste marriage, and because Leela Namdeo, that's a Dalit jati, and Urmila, that's a Kayastha, so it's interjati, and then most of these marriages are. But in this case, it's within the same community, both are Thakur, and they jumped into the canal and committed suicide together. But in many of the suicide notes that these female couples left behind, they presented the joint suicide as a union, as a marriage. Suicide rates among LGBT people are very high, individual suicide rates, like in other countries as well, in the US, for example. But joint suicide as a type of union is something unique to India, maybe Asia, but it is not found in the rest of in the West. So this is a uniquely sort of Indian type of South Asian type of because it's happened in Nepal as well, type of union. And when they leave the suicide notes, many of these women say we cannot be separated from each other, and we want to be husband and wife in the next life. So here they said, we've left this world to live with each other, and the world didn't allow us to stay together. Perhaps in the next birth, we will meet again. And I'll come back to this idea of the next birth, which I think is very, very important in terms of the Indian understanding of union. 2019, these two cousins from Rohania village went to Varanasi and married there at the temple. They sort of sat on dhanna there till the priest agreed to perform the ritual. And you see how very young they are. And when their families threatened them, they approached the police, and the police did tell the family, don't harass them. And what happened after this, we don't know, because journalists did not follow up. So, in my book, Love's Right on Same-Sex Marriage in India, 2000, this is the 2005 edition. So, when this book was published in 2005, there was India still had the anti-sodomy law, so homosexuality was still a crime. So there was no question of any movement for marriage equality, and so the book didn't get as much attention as it is now getting when the movement for marriage equality is on. So there was an updated edition of the book in 2021. The picture is based on these two this picture photograph of these two girls, and then in 2022, Penguin India had its 35th anniversary, and they issued this commemorative edition. They issued 35 important books, of which this was one. And they said that it's the only book-length study of these unions. So today, when we hear about same-sex marriage, we think mostly of these English-speaking people, and we think of celebrity weddings that we have heard of. But what I'm saying is that the true pioneers, and in many cases the martyrs of this movement, they initiated it a very long time ago without any movement. They did it on their own. And they didn't need any movement, because they used the language of love, for example, the rebirth, that Indians understand. And so in this book, I explored the legal traditions, the literary traditions, and the religious traditions that these women were drawing on, mostly women, there were a few men, these traditions provide spaces for same-sex unions, but also other socially disapproved unions. Okay, so the first wedding that I know of in among who was which was not of this group of non-English speaking was Aditya Advani and Michael Tarr in 1993 in Delhi. They got married at Aditya's family parents' home. The mother kind of helped with it. She suggested the wedding, in fact. All right, so that was that. But another example from two. So what I'm trying to say here is that in some cases the families violently oppose the marriage, right? And the girls have to run away, and in such cases often they are driven to suicide, but so on. But in some cases, interestingly, the families actually participate. And so, for example, here, Jaya and Tanuja were married in Patna in 2001. This was a Hindu ceremony at the Mahamaya temple. There were 200 guests. Jaya's sister married a man at the same time. You know, parents often have a dual wedding to save money, and that's what happened. So, when you have such a big ceremony, clearly the family was with them, and Jaya's entire family was present. But it's all very well to have a religious ceremony and be accepted by the community. That's great. But after that, when this came into the news, their landlord of the apartment they were renting asked them to leave. Right. So that's what happens if you don't have legal rights. And this is why you need legal rights. I'll come back to the question of legal rights. Okay. So just to say the temple at which they got married, Mahamaya temple, it's a goddess temple, one of the 52 Shakti Peeths. It was originally built in 13th century. So I think it's interesting that many times, not always, the women get married at goddess temples. Um, just one more example, Veena and Savita. So these marriages were happening all over the country, and these women had no contact with each other. It was their own idea to get married like this. Okay, so here you have these two women, Veena and Savita, who were childhood friends. Veena rescued Savita basically from an abusive marriage, and then Veena's family accepted Savita, who and Veena was already looking after her widowed brother's four children, so she was very active in her family, and the family. Sorry, one moment. Rekha, apna phone band karo. Veena's family accepted her, and she was looking after these four children. So she's very much a center, important in her family. And but still they had to hide, and then they went to court. Many of these women went to court, and this was while homosexuality was still illegal, and they went to court, but the courts in all cases said if they are adults, they are consenting adults, they can live together. All right. And every time this happened, the media would say, oh, this is the first time a court has allowed two women to live together, which is completely wrong. Going back to the 1990s, the courts have been saying that as adults they can live together, but this was not marriage. This just means they can live together. They don't get any legal rights of marriage. So the media basically has not been keeping track of these weddings and has been reporting them, but hasn't been seeing how the changes, the differences, etc. There was no systematic study except in my book. So one thing that used to happen is when these young women ran away, they had nowhere to go very often. They are unemployed or underemployed, very little educated, and Betu, who unfortunately died, was among the very few activists who risked life and limb to give shelter to these runaway couples. Most LGBT organizations don't have the wherewithal to do so. And so these girls often have to go back to their villages or small towns, and that's why they are separated, forcibly separated, and married to men, or they are forced to commit suicide. All right, 2021, so that's quite recent. A Dalit and a Brahmin woman got married. There was this huge ceremony of many Dalit weddings, and a Dalit and a Brahmin woman got married in Agra at this ceremony. Yeah, so that's an interesting one. And then we haven't been able to hear the voices of these women, but now, thanks to YouTube, we can hear some of their voices. These two village women in Hamirpur in 2019, Deepshika and Abhilasha, they garlanded each other at the offices of the Registrar of Marriages. So they wanted to get married, the registrar wouldn't let them, so they garlanded each other, and they signed a contract in court together. Many women had been doing this, signing what is called a friendship contract. And they, in the videos, there's more than one video, they asked the government to recognize, they're speaking in Hindi, they asked the government to recognize their marriage and to help them get the same rights as other citizens. And that's the point. So this is before the marriage case was filed in the courts. They are basically saying, recognize us and give us the same rights as other citizens. Yeah. All right, I'm going to skip over some of these. This is an example of these two young women who were basically forced to separate. They went to court, and by the time there was so much harassment that Rajvinder backed off and married a man, and then Baljit attempted suicide. I was telling you about Tingring and Roynati Basumatari, who also got married in a goddess temple in 1999. And about 10 years later, when they were totally, again, one of them is a domestic worker, the other works in the fields, agricultural laborers. So when there was an MLA election and the candidates came, the villagers who had accepted them said to the candidates, please get rights for these women. So what I'm trying to tell you is that before cases had been filed for marital rights in the courts, already people at the what is called the grassroots level were asking for rights. They understood what is needed. It's pretty simple, and they said, look, these two are part of our community. Get them some married rights. So that and the candidates were taken aback, and they promised to do that. Of course, when Tingling was interviewed by a journalist, she said, I don't know, candidates often forget the promises they make, but what do we have? We poor people only have hope. Um, Okay, so then there were several weddings by Hindu rites. The first one in India, the others that I know of in some in the US, and there was this Mala and Vega Subramaniam who got married in Seattle in 2002. Vaijanti Mala Nagaraja and Vega Vahini Subramaniam. It's a full name. Here is Michael and Aditya's wedding in Delhi in '93 being performed by the family guru, and here are they. Well, later they had these twins, and here they are in 2020 with the twins. They now live in Delhi. Um, okay, so now I'm going to go back into. I said the second aspect is going back to look at history and literature and how are same-sex unions depicted in history and literature, which we translated many texts in the book Same-Sex Love in India. All right, so let's take a random example. I can only give a few examples today. Katha Sarit Sagara, 11th century story cycle in Sanskrit. It depicts, there's a story of Pulindika and Vasudatta and depicts their lifelong union relationship. Pulindika is a bandit who is going to, and Vasudatta is going to be killed by the bandit group, but Pulindika tries to sacrifice himself instead of Vasudatta. And the feelings he has when he first sees Vasudatta, the same exact words are used for Vasudatta's feeling when he first sees his wife. So then they live together. Vasudatta gets married, Pulindika does not. At the end of the story, Vasudatta remembers his earlier births, and so he jumps off a cliff. His wife follows, but Pulindika also follows. This is, I think, very significant. And there are more than one story of a man dying in order to be with the man that he loves. There's more than one story of this. Now, the text, the Katha Sarit Sagara, explains this in this way. Vakti janamantara pritim manaha sneha dakaranam. Affection which arises in the heart without a cause speaks of love persisting from a former birth. And I think this is the unique Indian, after all, four religions born in India, Hinduism, Sikhism, Buddhism, and Jainism, accept the doctrine of rebirth. And those who don't belong to these religions but are Indian are very much aware of this doctrine of rebirth and even playfully or seriously refer to it in everyday conversation. So the idea of that relationships last from birth to birth, that's the only thing. Attachments last from birth to birth. So this is an idea that many in the past in literature, many couples refer to and texts refer to. And in the present, in the 20th, 21st centuries, many priests who have been interviewed, as well as couples who are in socially disapproved unions. So this could be any kind of union. It could be intercaste, it could be interclass, it could be, they refer to rebirth, that we have this attachment and this is because of being attached in a former birth. And so I think that's a uniquely Indic explanation and justification for disapproved unions of any kind. All right, so in the same text, the Katha Sarit Sagara, there are these interesting terms that I was the first to sort of write about, in which the text says that when describing two men who have chosen each other as male intimate friends, it uses the term Swayamvara Sakha, and for two women, Swayamvara Sakhi. Okay, of course, we know the word Swayamvara, we mostly think of it as a woman choosing a husband. But literally, what does Swayamvara mean? Swayam means self, and Vara means chosen, to choose. Okay, so Vara then by derivation refers to the bridegroom, but not only to that. It basically means self-choice. And so when you add the word Sakhi or Sakha, now adding the word Sakhi or Sakha, it may seem that we are only talking about friends, but no, we are not. Because what I have argued in Love's Right is that in the ancient texts, and medieval texts too, marriage is a type of friendship, and friendship is a type of marriage. Okay, for example, in the Hindu ceremony, in the Saptapadi, the last step, the last circle, is the term is used sakha, where the two spouses address each other as sakha, as friend. Okay, so marriage is basically a type of friendship. Friendship is the highest type of relationship in the Vedas, the relationship between humans and gods, in the Panchatantra, relationships between animals. These are all friendships. And marriage is a type of friendship. And that's not unique to India. Aristotle also, in his book, The Nicomachean Ethics, says that marriage is a type of friendship. So in the Katha Saritsagara, two women, Somaprabha and Kalingasena, they also fall in love at first sight. That is not my translation. That's Tony's translation, 1901, a British translator. He says they fall in love at first sight. And then Kalingasena wonders, she thinks about it, and she says, like, why am I having this strong attachment to her? And then she looks back at the past and she quotes earlier couples, earlier examples of female friends, and see so and so was also attached to so and so was also attached to so and so. So what I'm saying here is exactly what we are now doing, or what I am interested in doing, which is looking back to the past to find. Without a past, there is no present. Without a sense of history, you don't understand the present. And so, what we are doing now, or I am doing in my work, and many others are doing, that's what Kalingasena does. She looks back and she thinks it's not surprising, it's not unusual, because earlier two women have been attached like this. Okay. In the 11th century, here's an image. It's a larger than life size, beautiful image. The reproduction doesn't do justice, of course, of the god Kama, Kamadeva, the god of love and desire, shooting an arrow at two women. And if you look, when you see the actual statue, you can see that there's this triangular formation, and the smiles on the faces of all three are the same. It's the smile of bliss, of Ananda. And yeah, so what I'm saying is that in ancient India, there is an understanding of close intimacy, inseparable intimacy, shaped by rebirth between two men or two women. Uh, in the 14th century, another text that in same-sex love in India and Love's Right I have analyzed, there are these many stories, versions, these are all in Bengali. These are many versions of the Krittivas Ramayana, which tell the story somewhat differently, but the basic story is that two women, in one of the texts, they're named Chandra and Mala, who are widows, co-widows. They were married to the same man, he died, the same king, actually, they're queens, and he dies, and then the two women are in this, they basically make love. And then when one of them discovers that she is pregnant, she wants to end her life, commit suicide. But Brahma appears to her, Brahmadeva, and he says, listen, this is all planned and you will have a beautiful son. And then the story goes in different ways, but I don't have time to go into these different versions. But basically they have a son, and the name of the son is Bhagiratha. Now Bhagiratha is of course a very famous name, the one who brought the Ganga down from heaven to earth, so giver of life. This text, interestingly, analyzes his name by saying Bhagiratha means, the word bhaga in Sanskrit has about 100 meanings, as many words do. And this text says that the word means, because he was born of a vulva, or in some texts of two vulvas, therefore he was named Bhagiratha by God Brahma. Now that may not be a correct etymology, but interestingly, Krittivas Ramayana is not a minor text. It's a major text. It's the most important version of the Ramayana in Bengal, right? And he insists that the name is Bhagiratha. So what I'm saying here is that this is the only text, by the way, that I've found that I know of in world literature, in which two women have sex and produce a child together. And here it is done by the blessings of the gods who have planned the whole thing. Yeah. So what I'm saying is that the imagination, the poetic imagination, as in many cases, runs ahead and imagines something that is not possible at the time, but that may become possible much later. Probably, I have speculated that the authors looked around and saw co-wives raising their children together, as Rama has many mothers, and he treats them all as mothers in the Valmiki Ramayana. So similarly, they saw that, okay, women can be co-mothers, those who are co-wives can be co-mothers. What is the relationship of co-wives to each other? When the husband dies, they are going to continue living with each other, the co-widows. So in a sense, are they married to each other? That's the question I have asked. They're going to live together forever. So then perhaps the authors imagine, what if they could have a child together, actually produce a child together? Okay. Now, coming to medieval India, there are examples of long term relationships in Muslim India as well, parts of India that were under Muslim rule. There were two 18th century poets, Maulvi Mukarram Baksh and Mukarram. And when the older man, Maulvi, died, Mukarram observed Iddat. Now, Iddat is the period of mourning that is observed by Muslim widows. And he inherited all the Maulvi's property. So clearly, this is a long term union. There are other examples in our book, Same Sex Love in India, of falling in love. A Jewish Sufi who had converted to Islam falls in love with a Hindu, and so on and so forth. The story goes on. Emperor Aurangzeb executes him, but he's still revered as a Sufi. Another Sufi, Shah Hussain, fell in love with a Hindu youth, and then there was a lot of family pressure to separate them. They are threatened with execution. In this case, Emperor Akbar saves him, and now they're buried in Lahore, and there's an annual celebration at their dargah there. Okay. In this book of mine, Gender, Sex, and the City, I learned Urdu in order to read this poetry. And Urdu Rekhti poetry, which actually is very colloquial. And at the time, Urdu was called Hindi, which meant the language of Hind, the language of India, as opposed to Persian, the court language is the language of Persia, Farsi. So when you read it, it's very colloquial. If you read it out today, it sounds like everyday Hindi or Urdu. It's not high flown or highfalutin, but it's very beautiful and playful, and it's mostly written by Muslim men. And in the glossaries and dictionary, it describes. It has a woman speaker. The poetry has a woman speaker, which is very unusual, almost unheard of in Urdu poetry. And the poets describe male, male, female, 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 male unions, all in the same terms. And at this time, they also are words in the glossaries for sexual love between women and for a woman's female intimate partner. So there are lots of descriptions of the rituals that two women performed to enter into a union and declare themselves to be in this union. And one such description, I'll only quote one, is interesting because it actually uses the word marriage. It actually uses the word shadi. And this is from, so basically from the late 18th, early 19th century. The poet who wrote poetry about such women, he says that they share, the ritual is of sharing cardamom, and once they are married they are called ilaichi. Other words for such unions were dogana. Dogana means two. A doubled fruit was called a dogana fruit, when you have two bananas or two mangoes that are joined together. So the two women are like each other's half, second self. Okay. So this novel, which I wrote in 2021, Memory of Light, I depicted this: two women getting married by performing a ritual that is witnessed by their female friends. And these female-female marriages are a test. Are there's They are described both in poetry and in prose in the late 18th, early 19th centuries. Okay, all right, this I already showed. That's all right. So now coming to what present day teachers say. So there is a lot of debate among religious gurus and teachers, and not all of them agree. But because Hinduism doesn't have one organized and central hierarchy, different priests, some priests choose to perform a marriage, some swamis choose to perform it, and others refuse. So, Swami Bodhananda Saraswati, who conducted this wedding in 1993 of these two men, he said, I interviewed him at length in Love's Right, in the book Love's Right, and he says, look, I thought about it and I said, here, they want to live together, so they have to have blessings of God, parents, and elders. So I chanted mantras. And he also said that, look, all relationships and all desire is the same. It's all going to produce problems. The same problems will be faced in any relationship, the same conflicts. And ultimately, you have to go beyond desire. But to go beyond desire, many philosophers would say you have to go through it. You can't avoid it for most people. So that's what he gave a lengthy explanation. Another priest whom I interviewed, now he conducted the wedding of Mala and Vega in Seattle in 2002. And here again, their families were divided. One parent on each side attended, one parent did not. And I interviewed the priest briefly. I was present at the wedding, and he said when he was asked to perform this wedding, he had never heard of such a thing before, but he thought about it, and he knew that some of the other priests in his lineage would disapprove of this. But he said, look, marriage is a union of spirits. So this is where we come back to what that village school teacher said. Marriage is a union of two souls. And I point out that in most religious traditions, the spirit, the soul, the Atman, whatever you call it, is not male or female. Most religions would agree that the soul is not gendered. And certainly Hinduism thinks that. So the Atman is not gendered, and therefore, if two are attached to each other, this must be from a previous birth, and therefore there is I could perform this wedding, and he knew he'd be criticized for it, but he did it anyway. All right. Then after they got married, they sued the state, Washington State, to overturn the Defense of Marriage Act. And there were 155 guests at the wedding. They won this case also. The Defense of Marriage Act was basically to prohibit same-sex marriage. So they sued and they won. Okay, one moment. Okay, so to come back to my first point, then the idea of same sex marriage doesn't come from the West or from the modern urban upper class. But I want to point out that even the rich, the upper class, and the high jati people, they suffer from the same legal discrimination against same sex marriage. Now, you may think, oh, rich people have no problems. That's not true. They have a lot of problems. Here's an example. When an Indian citizen or a man who holds a OCI, Overseas Citizenship of India, marries a non Indian woman, or vice versa, woman marries a man, immediately the foreign spouse has the right to apply for an OCI card. When they get this card, that spouse, the foreign spouse, has the right to live in India permanently. It's a lifelong visa, to work in India, to own property, to open a bank account, etc. So the couple can decide to come and live in India. But the foreign same-sex spouse of an Indian citizen or an OCI holder has no rights at all. Such a spouse can only get a tourist visa and stay in India for 6 months at a time. Every 6 months, you have to leave the country for some days and come back. Yeah. So, for example, I now know of a couple. I know of a couple who just now, one of them is seriously ill, and he's the foreign spouse. He's in India. He is treated as a tourist. It's very difficult to get treatment as a tourist, and also, if he's too ill, how is he going to leave for 2 days and come back after 6 months at a time, right? Another example, so Aditya and Michael, whose picture I showed you, they were married in 93. Okay. So Michael went to England to renew his tourist visa. Then COVID happened. When COVID happened, after some time, all the OCI holders, including the heterosexual spouses of Indians, were allowed back into India. But tourist visas were not allowed back until March 22. That means for 2 years, Michael was separated from his husband and two children. He could only see them on Zoom. At 8 years old, 2 years is a very long time in a child's life to be separated from one parent. So what this means is that Indian same-sex spouses, any class, it doesn't help what class you're from, are legally aliens to their partners, whether Indian or non-Indian. If the partner is seriously ill or dies, the spouse has no right to make any decisions, no right to inherit anything. Even if they have been together for decades, you are nobody. You are a legal alien. Okay. I know of a case where two young women were living together, and one of them had an untimely death of a cerebral hemorrhage. When she became very seriously ill, her family came from the other town. They thought this other woman is just a roommate or a friend, and they just took her away to their hometown. And when she died, they took away all her stuff as well. The partner got no respect, no recognition, no right to make any medical decisions or anything. They just took her away from her. Okay, so those are some of the important rights and the reasons to be married. The other thing I would say is that why is it important? Why is marriage important? Now, there are some queer theorists and activists who say, oh, marriage is a very bad idea anyway, and it's such a heterosexist, patriarchal, I'm done with the PowerPoint now, patriarchal tradition, heteronormative, this and that, so we don't need it. And so we shouldn't get married. Okay, so my point here, there are 2 or 3 points I want to make here. First, if you don't want to get married, don't get married. But that doesn't mean that other people should be deprived of their rights, okay? It's a legal right that everyone should have. Secondly, if you're really opposed to marriage, then launch a movement to abolish all marriage. I don't see any such movement. If you abolish all marriage, including heterosexual marriage, then fine. Then nobody needs to get married, and it's okay. But no, when you only raise the question when LGBT people want to get married, otherwise you're fine with heterosexual weddings, you attend them and everything. And then this means this kind of argument arises from a deep homophobia. You may not realize it's from homophobia, but it is. You think that straight people should have the right to marry, but LGBT people should not have the right to marry. A same-sex partner, you shouldn't be able to marry a same-sex partner, which is absurd. Okay, and I just want to, since it's here, show you this book, The Broken Rainbow, which has just appeared like 2 days ago. This is my book of poems where I talk, which is about various themes and so on. And one of the themes is also about LGBT. So it should be on Amazon.in very soon. Okay, I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you for that enlightening talk, ma'am. Now we can take some audience questions.
You've stopped recording, I hope?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Just give me 2 minutes.
Mhm.